The metal corridors of the Harbinger-class warship Nyx hummed with the rhythmic thrum of its core reactor. Beyond the reinforced windows, the void stretched infinitely, a sea of darkness peppered with stars that bore silent witness to the conflicts of lesser beings. Inside, Commander Evelyn Voss moved with practiced ease, her black tactical suit clinging to her athletic frame like a second skin. Every step she took echoed with purpose, a stark contrast to the hollow silence that filled the command deck. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not anymore. A year ago, the war had ended, or so they had been told. Humanity's fleets had crushed the Red Legion, an empire of brutal warlords and genetically enhanced warriors, driving them back beyond the Zeta periphery. The United Terran Dominion had declared victory, the media broadcasting images of burning alien warships as proof of their supremacy. But Voss had seen too much to believe in easy endings. And now, standing in the shadowed corridor, staring at the encrypted data chip clutched in her palm, she knew she had been right. The message had come through on a dead channel, one that should have been wiped after the war's end. It bore a signature she hadn't seen in years. Major Elias Kane, a name whispered in the dark corners of Dominion intelligence, a man who had disappeared long before the war's final battle. They're still alive. We were wrong. I have proof. For sentences. That was all. Voss exhaled slowly, turning the chip over in her fingers. She had spent the last 6 months drowning in red tape, buried under reports that painted a carefully sanitized version of events. The truth had been bled dry by bureaucrats who had no interest in unearthing what lay beneath the silence. If Kane was reaching out now, it meant one thing. The war hadn't ended. A soft chime echoed through the corridor. She wasn't alone. Voss pocketed the chip and turned just as the doors slid open. A figure stepped through, broad-shouldered and wrapped in a tactical cloak that barely concealed the battle-worn armor beneath. Captain Adrian Wolfe. His dark eyes flicked to her hand, sharp as ever. Tell me that isn't what I think it is. Voss met his gaze. If you already know, why are you asking? Because I was hoping you weren't about to do something reckless. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Command has eyes everywhere. If they know you're digging, they don't. She squared her shoulders. Not yet. A muscle tightened in Wolfe's jaw. He was one of the few people she trusted, and that wasn't something she gave lightly. They had fought side by side, bled together on the frozen hell of Kar-Thus-4 and the burning wreckage of Delta Prime. He knew better than most that the truth had a way of getting people killed. And yet, he didn't try to stop her. What's the play? He asked instead. She glanced down at her wrist console, pulling up a set of coordinates embedded in the data. A location deep in restricted space. We find Kane. And if he's already dead? Voss's fingers curled into a fist. Then we find out who silenced him. The Nyx cut through space like a predator stalking unseen prey. Officially, the vessel was undergoing standard patrol procedures, its crew unaware of the true nature of their mission. Voss had ensured that only a select few knew their real destination, those she could trust. As they neared the coordinates, the darkness around them grew deeper, the stars thinning into an eerie nothingness. And then they saw it. A derelict Dominion warship, the Revenant, drifting lifelessly through the void. Voss's breath hitched. The Revenant had been declared destroyed in the final days of the war. And yet, here it was scarred but whole. We're being hailed, the comm officer reported. But it's not on Dominion frequencies. Patch it through. A burst of static filled the bridge before a voice cut through. A voice that had been presumed dead. You shouldn't have come here. Elias Kane. Voss leaned forward. Kane, it's Voss. We got your message. Silence. And then, you need to leave. Now. She exchanged a look with Wolfe. Not happening. Not until you tell me what the hell is going on. A pause. Then the screen flickered to life. Kane appeared. Gaunt, exhausted, but alive. And behind him stood the impossible. A Red Legion soldier. But not just any soldier. A high-ranking warlord. One who should have been dead. Wolfe muttered a curse. This is a trap. Kane's expression was grim. No, it's worse than that. The screen crackled, and for a split second, something flickered in the background. a shadow, shifting against the dim light. And then, the Revenant's warning klaxons blared. Shit! Voss, listen to me. Kane's voice was sharp now. Urgent. They know you're here. They buried the truth. And if you don't leave now, you'll be buried with it. And then the screen went dark. A moment later, the Nyx's sensors screamed with proximity alarms. Something was coming. And it wasn't alone. Voss had faced death before. She had seen it in the eyes of fallen comrades, in the silent wreckage of 1,000 lost ships. But this was something else. The Revenant was coming to life, its engines roaring back to power. From the depths of the derelict, ships began to stir, sleek, blackened vessels that bore no Dominion insignia. Ghosts of a war that had never truly ended. Wolf was already barking orders. The bridge a flurry of motion. We need to move now. Voss's mind raced. Leaving meant abandoning Kane. But staying meant death. Her decision was made for her when the first shots were fired. The war wasn't over. It had just been waiting. And now, silence would no longer be enough to bury the truth. The Nyx tore through the darkness, its engines roaring as the first blasts of enemy fire illuminated the void. Voss gripped the edge of the command console, her eyes locked on the growing swarm of hostile vessels emerging from the Revenant's shadow. They moved with unnatural precision, forming a tight web around the Dominion ship. This wasn't a random encounter. They had been waiting. Evasive maneuvers. Wolf barked, his fingers flying across the tactical console. The ship lurched hard to port, narrowly dodging a plasma barrage that would have torn through its reinforced hull. The bridge flickered with emergency lighting as shields took the brunt of a secondary strike. Voss's heart pounded, but her mind was ice. Think, adapt, survive. Kane, she snapped, activating the secure comms link. If you're not already dead, tell me what the hell is going on. Static. Then, a ragged breath. You need to break free. Now. Working on it? She ground out, eyes darting to the tactical display. But I need answers. Who are we dealing with? Kane's voice was hoarse, edged with something she couldn't quite place, fear. Not Red Legion. Not Dominion. Something else. They've been operating in the shadows for years, cleaning up the mess we were never meant to see. Voss stiffened. She had suspected the war's end had been too clean, too neat. The Red Legion had been a war machine built for conquest. They wouldn't have simply collapsed overnight, unless someone had ensured they did. Another explosion rocked the Nyx. Sparks showered the bridge as one of the consoles overloaded. We won't last long in a dogfight, Wolf growled. We need an out. Voss's mind raced. Their position was compromised, their exit routes cut off. But the Revenant, if Kane had managed to survive inside, then maybe, just maybe, prepare for a breach maneuver, she ordered, turning to Wolf. We go in. Wolf stared at her. That's suicide. Maybe. Her jaw tightened. But staying out here is a guarantee. A beat of hesitation. Then Wolf exhaled sharply. You're a damn lunatic. She didn't argue. Within moments, the Nyx twisted through the chaos, banking hard as it made a desperate dash toward the derelict warship. Enemy fire rained down, searing past its hull, but the pilot pushed forward, weaving through the storm. At the last possible second, the Nyx's forward thrusters fired, slowing just enough to deploy its boarding clamps onto the Revenant's side. A metallic groan echoed through the ship as the connection locked in place. Breach team, move now, Voss ordered. Armed and ready, she and Wolf led the charge into the airlock. The moment the hatch hissed open, they were greeted by absolute darkness. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of metal and something else. Something old, like rot left to fester in the shadows. Voss's visor adjusted, scanning for movement. Then a whisper. Low. Inhuman. She raised her weapon. Lights? Wolf muttered, activating his shoulder beacon. The corridor ahead flickered to life, revealing the bodies. Red Legion warriors, sprawled across the metal floor. Their armor was cracked, their bodies unnaturally still. Some looked as though they had been dead for years, their forms dried and desiccated. But others looked fresh. Too fresh. Voss stepped forward carefully, her boots echoing in the silence. She crouched beside one of the fallen, fingers brushing the emblem on its shoulder. "This wasn't a battle," she murmured. "They didn't even have their weapons drawn." Wolf swore under his breath. "Then what the hell killed them?" A shuffle in the darkness. They turned as a figure emerged from the shadows. His breath labored, his uniform torn. Cain. His eyes were wide, wild, but there was no relief in his expression. Only urgency. "You shouldn't have come here," he rasped. Voss stepped forward. "Cain, what happened?" He shook his head. "No time. They'll know you're inside. You have to leave." "Not without answers," Wolf snapped. "Who are they?" Cain's mouth opened, but before he could speak, the corridor behind him shifted. Voss's breath caught as she saw movement. Something tall, inhuman, its shape blending into the metal walls like a shadow come to life. And then it lunged. Cain barely had time to react before the creature struck, its claws sinking into his shoulder. He screamed as it lifted him off the ground, pinning him against the bulkhead. Voss moved on instinct, her weapon firing. The rounds hit something, but the creature barely flinched. Its form rippled, shifting, as if it existed between reality and something far worse. Then it turned. Eyes like burning voids locked onto her. A whisper filled the air, curling around her mind. Not words, not sound. Something deeper. Presence. She gritted her teeth, forcing herself to move, to think. "Cain, hold on." But it was too late. The creature's form twisted, dragging Cain into the darkness. His scream cut off abruptly. Then silence. Voss's pulse pounded. What the hell was that? Wolf was already pulling her back. "We need to move now." For once, she didn't argue. They ran, their boots pounding against the metal, the shadows pressing closer. The bodies of the fallen seemed to watch them, their empty eyes accusing. By the time they reached the breach point, the Nyx was already under fire. The enemy ships had repositioned, closing the noose. Voss's comm crackled. "Commander, we can't hold position much longer." She clenched her jaw. "Prepare for emergency detachment." The airlock doors hissed shut behind them as they boarded. The ship shuddered violently, the clamps releasing with a groan. The moment they were clear, the pilot pushed the engines to maximum, sending them hurtling away from the Revenant. On the view screen, the derelict loomed, silent once more. Cain was gone. The truth he had tried to reveal, still buried. But something else had been left in its place. A whisper, an echo in her mind. And she knew, without a doubt, that whatever had been waiting aboard the Revenant, it was not finished with them. The Nyx cut through the black, engines burning at full thrust. But Evelyn Voss knew they weren't escaping. Not really. Not from this. She gripped the armrest of her command chair, eyes locked on the tactical display. The enemy ships that had swarmed from the Revenant weren't pursuing. Not yet. They hovered at the edges of the wreckage, their formations eerily still, like predators watching prey already ensnared. A warning flared across the console. Internal security breach. Voss's pulse spiked. She turned sharply to Wolf. "We're not alone." His jaw tightened. "They got aboard?" Voss was already out of her seat, weapon drawn, moving with purpose. "Deck 4. Cargo hold." Wolf fell in step beside her. Behind them, the ship's claxons began to wail. A hollow, distant sound that seemed to sink beneath the weight pressing against the walls, against the air. She could feel it. It wasn't just an enemy. It was something else. By the time they reached the cargo bay, the doors were already failing. The reinforced blast seals trembled, their locking mechanisms whining under strain. Then they buckled. The air rippled as the lights flickered, a deep cold spilling into the corridor, unnatural in the pressurized ship. The shadows inside the hold shifted, lengthening as something moved within them. And then Cain stepped out. Voss went still. He was bloodied, armor torn. But it wasn't the wounds that froze her breath. It was his eyes. Dark. Empty. Not his. Wolf lifted his weapon. "Back away." Now. Kane didn't react. He took another step forward, slow, deliberate. They let me go. His voice was wrong. Hollow. Like something else was speaking through him. Voss clenched her jaw. You're lying. A smile twitched at the corner of his lips. An expression that didn't belong to him. You don't understand, Evelyn. They've been here far longer than we have. Longer than any of us. Something shifted behind him. The air warped, and for a fraction of a second Voss saw the shape flicker, the same presence that had taken him. She fired. The round struck Kane's center mass, but he didn't fall. His body absorbed the impact, flesh rippling like something beneath his skin had caught the bullet before it could do real harm. And then, slowly, he straightened. They don't want war, he said. Not yet. Voss fired again. This time, Kane's body blurred, and he was suddenly behind her. The impact sent her crashing into the bulkhead, pain lancing through her ribs. Wolf shouted her name, his rifle barking, but Kane moved too fast. Not human. Not anymore. Voss twisted, gasping for breath, her hand closing around the knife strapped to her thigh. Kane loomed over her, eyes black pits of something ancient. They want you to listen. Voss drove the knife straight into his throat. For a moment his body jerked, and then he laughed, a sickening, wet sound. Voss wrenched the blade free as Wolf pulled her back, his free hand slamming the emergency override on the cargo bay door. Kane made no move to stop them. He only watched, and as the doors slammed shut, sealing them off, his voice slipped through the crack like a whisper laced with static. You can't bury the truth. The moment they were clear, Wolf hit the comms. Containment lockdown. Now. Already in effect, the bridge officer confirmed. But sir, the ship lurched. Not from an external hit. From inside. Voss and Wolf barely stayed on their feet as the deck vibrated beneath them. The emergency lighting flickered, static hissing through the comms. Then, a sound. Low. Building. A pulse. Presence. Voss pressed a hand to her temple as a sharp spike of pain lanced through her skull. A second later, Wolf dropped to his knees. His breathing hitched. Voss! She turned, and the walls weren't walls anymore. The corridors stretched, dark veins spidering through the metal, pulsing with something that didn't belong. The Nyx was changing, or something inside it was. Voss forced herself to move, dragging Wolf upright. Get to engineering. Now. They ran. The ship twisted around them, bulkheads bending, warping, becoming something else. Shadows clung to the corners of her vision, shifting, watching. She refused to stop. By the time they reached engineering, the main systems were failing. The chief engineer turned, face pale. Commander, whatever this is, it's spreading through the ship's neural core. Voss didn't hesitate. Purge it. The engineer faltered. That would. Do it. He moved. The override sequence engaged. Across the ship, emergency firewalls activated, sealing off the infected systems. The Nyx shuddered violently, the engines straining as the corruption fought to hold. Then a scream. Not from the comms. Not from the crew. From the ship itself. The lights died. Silence. A heartbeat. Then the emergency backups surged to life. The shadows recoiled. The Nyx stabilized. For a long moment no one moved. Then Wolf exhaled, his voice rough. Did it work? The engineer swallowed hard. I think so. Voss didn't believe it. Not yet. She turned to the main display, pulling up external scans. The Revenant still drifted in the dark, its silent watchers unmoving. But Kane was gone. Voss flexed her fingers, tension coiled in her muscles. Get us out of here. The Nyx's engines roared. As they left the wreckage behind, Wolf met her gaze. This isn't over. Voss nodded. She knew, because deep in the void, something watched. And it was waiting. The Nyx drifted in the cold void, its engines running low to avoid detection. Evelyn Voss stood on the bridge, staring at the endless black beyond the viewport. The Revenant was gone now, swallowed by the dark. But its presence lingered, inside her mind, inside the ship. No one spoke of Kane. No one dared. Wolf stood beside her, arms crossed, his jaw tight. They won't let this go. Voss didn't look at him. I know. The Dominion would never ignore what had happened. Not after the Nyx had barely escaped with its systems intact. Not after whatever that thing was had torn through their firewalls, nearly consuming them from the inside. More than that, she knew something had come back with them. The lights still flickered at odd moments. The ship's artificial gravity stuttered unpredictably, sending objects drifting for mere seconds before correcting. The crew reported whispers in empty halls, doors opening and closing without input. Voss had felt it too. The weight, the presence. Something watching. The Dominion had ordered them to dock at Outpost Helios, a deep space station orbiting the dead moon of Luthian 4. Officially, it was for repairs and debriefing. Unofficially, Voss knew they were being contained. Helios was isolated. No major fleet routes. No civilian access. If the Dominion wanted to quarantine them, it was the perfect place to do it. The station loomed in the viewport, a massive construct of metal and glass, its spires reaching toward the void like grasping fingers. Voss's comm crackled. Commander, we have clearance to dock. She exhaled slowly. Take us in. The Nyx moved forward, guided by automated systems. The docking clamps locked into place with a dull thunk. Silence. Then the hangar doors opened. Voss led the crew down the boarding ramp, her boots hitting the steel deck with purpose. The station was eerily quiet. No welcoming party. No high-ranking officials. Only a handful of security personnel and a man in a Dominion officer's uniform. Admiral Riker. Voss saluted. Sir. Riker studied her with unreadable eyes. Commander Voss, you and your crew will follow me. No formalities. No explanations. Voss exchanged a glance with Wolf but said nothing. They followed. The corridors of Helios were sterile, white lights casting harsh shadows. The deeper they went, the heavier the air became. It was subtle and oppressive stillness. Then, the doors at the end of the corridor slid open, revealing a cold, featureless room. No windows, no monitors, only a single table and a set of chairs. Interrogation. Riker gestured. Sit. Voss did. So did Wolf. Riker remained standing. Tell me what happened aboard the Revenant. Voss held his gaze. I sent my full report. Riker didn't blink. I want to hear it from you. She exhaled sharply. We found no survivors. The Red Legion weren't killed in combat. Something else got to them first. Something, Riker repeated. She nodded. It wasn't Dominion. It wasn't Red Legion. It was something older. For the first time, something flickered in Riker's eyes. He already knew. Wolf leaned forward. Sir, with all due respect, what the hell was that thing? Riker was silent for a long moment. Then he turned, inputting a command into a hidden console. The walls shifted, revealing a screen. Data scrolled. Images flashed. Records dating back centuries. A name appeared at the top of the file. Project. Hallow Veil. Voss's breath caught. Riker faced them again. You weren't supposed to find the Revenant. You weren't supposed to know what was buried there. Voss felt her pulse hammering. What is this? Riker's expression hardened. A mistake. The screen displayed an image of a world. A dead world. Charred ruins. Blackened spires reaching toward a sky filled with shadow. And at its center something massive. A structure. Temple. Prison. This was the first contact site, Riker said. Over 200 years ago, Dominion explorers found it buried beneath the surface of a nameless moon. They went in. They never came out. Voss's skin prickled. What did they find? Riker's voice was grim. Something that doesn't belong in our universe. The next image appeared. A figure. Distorted. Twisted. Its form shifted, as though reality itself rejected it. And its eyes. The same void-black pits Kane had. Wolf swore under his breath. Voss's mind raced. You knew. The Dominion knew. Riker's silence was answer enough. Voss clenched her fists. And the Revenant? It was a containment vessel, Riker admitted. The crew was never meant to return. The ship was meant to drift, to vanish. A cold realization settled in Voss's stomach. Until we found it. Riker nodded. And now it knows you exist. The lights flickered. The room tilted. For a split second, Voss felt the same pressure she had aboard the Revenant. A pulse. A whisper. Not sound. Something deeper. Wolf's breathing hitched. Tell me you felt that. Riker's expression was grim. It's already inside. The station alarms blared. Voss shot to her feet. What's happening? A voice crackled through the comms. Containment breach in Sector 6. We have... Oh God, we have... The feed cut to static. The lights died. Then the whispering began. Not from the speakers. From the walls. From the air. Riker's voice was sharp. We need to move. Now. They ran. The station trembled beneath their feet. The air growing thick, heavy. The corridors stretched. Dark veins creeping along the walls. The shadows watched. As they rounded the corner, a figure stood in their path. Not human. Not anymore. Kane. His head tilted, black eyes gleaming. You can't run. Voss raised her weapon. Kane smiled, and the station plunged into darkness.